Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Research America Alliance call. I'm Jenny LeRae, a member of our leadership team, and thank you for joining us today on Zoom. And for those of you who are Alliance members, we thank you for your partnership with Research America. First, some housekeeping. If you're not a member and you want to learn about more about what it means to be an Alliance member, please reach out to Don Cook. His email is in the chat, and he can share more information with you. When we get to the Q&A part of our discussion, you can use the chat box or the Q&A to post your questions, and we will get to as many as we can. So today's Alliance discussion, we are going to take a close look at the U.S. biotech sector. And I'm really happy to have Dr. Garrett Dunlap, who's the Associate Director of Policy and International Engagement at the Engineering Biology Research Consortium, EBRC, and Dr. Kelly Seagraves, who's the Vice President for National Security and International Affairs at the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. So with their help and your great questions, we're going to explore biotech's importance to patients, to our economy, current challenges, and policy priorities. And Garrett, you're going to kick things off with a brief presentation, starting with information about your very interesting interdisciplinary organization. So Garrett, let's start with your presentation. Thank you.
Sounds great. Um, while I pull it up, I just want to say thank you so much for having me, and extremely excited to be on this talk today, and also extremely excited to be doing it with Kelly and the good folks over at Bio. So yeah, I'm gonna hopefully give us a little bit of a maybe it's a where we've been, where we are, and where we're going of biotechnology. Really kind of looking back the past few years and some of the kind of turbulence and inflections of the over the past year or so, and then thoughts on some of the momentum that's really exciting me and the ecosystem right now. Um, so briefly about who I am and who EBRC is. EBRC is a member organization. Our mission is really to advance the field of engineering biology to be able to address national and global needs. We are a organization that includes members from both universities and far over 100, both from the US and internationally, as well as a number of industry members. We engage very closely with both US government and other governments around the world, and really aim to kind of be that coalescing effort of all three of these areas. Um, EBRC focuses our efforts in four topics or four efforts. So the first is road mapping, really thinking about how biotechnology can be a solution. We've published 6 roadmaps to date, including roadmaps on biotechnology in space, microbiome engineering, biotechnology for defense applications, et cetera. But really thinking about how biotechnology can be a solution and what are the current bottlenecks and challenges keeping us from that. Efforts around education and workforce development, as well as kind of public bioliteracy and public engagement. Responsible innovation and security, so ensuring that any potential risks associated with biotechnology and biotech research are mitigated. And then, as mentioned, I lead our policy and international efforts, really working both to convene and grow the global bioeconomy, but particularly here in the US, ensuring that policymakers are aware of biotechnology, its implications and applications. EBRC kind of works in a holistic way, application-wise. We have members and efforts that span kind of all areas and potential applications. Of course, health and medicine, and I'm a PhD immunologist by training, so it's always near and dear to my heart. But other efforts and members that focus on bioindustrial manufacturing, food and agriculture, and other applications. So as I said, this is a bit of a where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. So starting with the where we've been, wanted to kind of look back about a decade or so in the past and really kind of think about this period as a building point of kind of setting the stage in so many ways, both the creation of a number of kind of key organizations and institutions, organizations like uh, EBRC, but also other ones like Biomade. A lot of efforts both from the National Academy of Science and other organizations and efforts. And you can see I even have a important report from Bio on the topic, but really this period of thinking of how biotechnology fits into the US economy. And then you see on the far right, kind of ending this period on the Biden era executive order on the bioeconomy, and really seeing that as a period that catalyzed a lot of effort and a lot of momentum around coordinating activities. And on the next two slides, I have a small sampling of the many reports and publications that came, following the executive order. Ones that cover biomanufacturing and workforce development, data, biomass, biosecurity, really any topic around bio, probably a report. And I think was a really exciting moment for biotechnology and seeing biotechnology in action. Um, I kind of then moved into maybe the last year and a half of kind of framing it as a period of uncertainty, and with President Trump taking office at the beginning of last year, and a few months later, amongst the executive order rescissions, was sad to see the executive order on the bioeconomy as one of them. And then I pull out this quote around kind of the reason or rationale of it, was quote, funneling resources into radical biotechnology and biomanufacturing initiatives under the guise of environmental policy. With the rescission of this, and with kind of other uncertainties and questions kind of early on in the administration, I think obviously myself, but a lot of the community was very concerned about what, if any, role biotechnology would have in the administration, and how we would think about it going forward. And I try to be optimistic as much as I can. So we'll highlight a couple kind of glimpses that we've gotten from the current administration, that do give a sense or an importance to biotechnology still. There's this letter jointly from the directors of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, and the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, late last year, that laid out kind of a set of federal research priorities, kind of across the board. But excitingly, and particularly, one of the kind of key focuses or key areas of mention is biotechnology. And I kind of pulled out this quote here that you can read, but in particular, the kind of bolded part of what the role of biotechnology and biomanufacturing might be seen as in this administration. And they really frame it as, using biotechnology to help secure our supply chains, create jobs, and build scalable and universal manufacturing capacity. And then calls on agencies to support innovation in biological platforms, as well as kind of commercialization and infrastructure efforts. Many of you are probably familiar or have tracked the Genesis mission in the last few months, and in particular, have been excited by the call for and set of grand challenges that were introduced as part of the Genesis mission executive order. These areas that were kind of set forth in this call included a number of areas, including quantum, AI, nuclear energy, as well as biotechnology. And when just about a month ago, the list of challenges were released, we saw biotechnology as kind of the the core focus of one of the grand challenges. It's called Scaling the Biotechnology Revolution, that in itself kind of encompasses what I would say a wide swath of different focuses and applications and areas. But we also see biotechnology being referred to or called out as an enabler to a number of other grand challenges. So, particularly thinking about the role of biotechnology for critical minerals extraction, or the role of biotechnology to design new materials, things like that, and really see biotechnology not just as kind of an effort in itself, but something that can help enable others. Um, and then moving on from the administration to kind of more congressional side. Many of you might have engaged with them or come across the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, the NSCEB. In 2022, Congress charged the NSCEB with the responsibility of examining the intersection of biotechnology and national security. A set of commissioners were chosen that includes both Senators Young, Republican from Indiana, and Senator Padilla, Democrat from California, as well as Representative Stephanie Bice, Republican from Oklahoma, and Representative Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, as well as a number of non-government commissioners. And I think this in itself really highlights the role of kind of a bipartisan, all hands on deck, all efforts commission. The commission published their final report like almost exactly a year ago. You can find it at biotech.senate.gov. The report includes 49 recommendations across 6 thrusts that I list here. The thrusts are prioritizing biotechnology at the national level, mobilizing the private sector, maximizing the benefits of bio for defense, out innovating our competitors, and particularly adversarial nations. Efforts around building the biotechnology workforce and building bioliteracy, and then mobilizing the strengths of allies and partners. So both, like efforts for the U.S. to outcompete, as well as still engage with and work with allies and partners. I will say, since the report was released exactly a year ago again, there has been nothing short of a flurry of legislation that has been introduced both by the commissioners that are in Congress, as well as other members. This is honestly, I think, a small selection, but I think really highlights the Commission's urge and need and desire to ensure that the recommendations set forth really do transfer to legislative momentum. And so, briefly, I pull out 3. I think these 3 in themselves will kind of highlight the recommendations and how biotechnology could or should be seen, and how the Commission's efforts really are aiming to kind of build that broader infrastructure and coordination around biotechnology. So the first and perhaps the most important, I would say, is the NBIA, the National Biotechnology Initiative Act. The NBIA would really work at the kind of coordination level. It would establish a National Biotechnology Coordination Office at the White House that would kind of lead and coordinate across agencies. It would have aims to focus and streamline kind of regulation and regulatory barriers, and would also be in charge of developing and implementing a national biotechnology strategy. Amongst other things, would establish an advisor to the president for biotechnology who would direct that office, would set up and run an interagency committee, and then would define clearer roles across agencies. All of these things, as you can see or imagine, really working in that whole of government approach, and really ensuring that biotechnology though it sits across so many agencies and so many offices and committees, that it's being done in a coordinated and approach with effective crosstalk. Um, the second one that I want to mention, just because I think that the topic is so prevalent, is in the world of AI. This is one of the most recent bills, the AI Ready Biodata Standards Act. Really would work to help define ways to develop AI ready data that can be more effectively curated, interoperable, that can work across different data sets, and really working to help boost and bolster our ability to develop and train biological AI models for all manner of applications, especially including health. Um, in general, would create a lot of efforts and support around ensuring that researchers are um, thinking about kind of standards and the kind of AI readiness of their data before they collect it, as they're in the kind of initial stages of thinking about their experiments and things. And then lastly, the last example is the Biomanufacturing Excellence Act that was introduced late last year. Um, Amongst its goals would be to create a national biopharmaceutical manufacturing center of excellence. This would be tasked with a couple things. Would be tasked to conduct public-private research, particularly on new ways and innovations around scaling manufacturing and research and development. It would work again with kind of a wide coalition to identify challenges to scaling, in particular products that are important to national security, public health, and economic security. And then would also have efforts to help talent pipeline and workforce development training, really by partnering with institutions across the ecosystem. I think these three in themselves, being again only a kind of a sampling of the last year, really highlight that there is momentum, interest, and excitement to kind of build that underlying infrastructure of biotechnology that will support efforts, both in kind of the health and medical areas, but also in other areas. In terms of kind of continuing to build the interest and the momentum and the bioliteracy on the Hill, I want to make sure I highlight the Biotech Caucus that got launched in the middle of last year by Representatives Houlihan from Pennsylvania and Bice from Oklahoma. The caucus launched kind of with these three aims below, and you can see it's no coincidence that they spell bio, but the first being biosecurity, really thinking about the role of biotechnology in national security and how to ensure that the U.S. can retain its lead. Innovation, so how to both drive competitiveness and accelerate efforts, but also cut barriers where they exist and where they're an undue hindrance to research. And then opportunity, really thinking about the economic and jobs component. How can biotech drive job creation, job growth, and in particular do so kind of across the country, not just on the coasts. And excitingly, as of today, there are 52 members of the caucus in the House, and doubly exciting, the caucus insofar has been a Noah's Ark caucus, which means that representatives are added in a pair, so a Democrat and a Republican pair, meaning that right now the caucus is 26 Democrats and 26 Republicans. I think that's been so exciting to have such a strong bipartisan effort as part of this, and awareness of what biotechnology can be. And then just kind of ending up, aiming to have the caucus be not just a a roster of names, but to actually have it be active and doing things. So a couple of these pictures are from some of the events. We hosted a kind of launch reception in December for the caucus and had people from all over the city and beyond in town. And a couple of weeks ago, did a congressional briefing on cloud labs, or the intersection of automation and biotech, and have done other briefings. And then the co-chairs have also set up an endorsement process, and just a few weeks ago announced the first set of bills that the caucus has kind of formally endorsed, which I think adds an additional level of kind of excitement and kind of strength of the caucus and its voice. And then very lastly, I just want to take a step back from the national picture to the more local and state level, and was really excited about this event that we co-led last week, along with the NSCEB as well as FAS, the Federation of American Scientists. We hosted over 100 attendees from 35 states here in DC, really to build bridges between states and state ecosystems. We had conversations and presentations across three topics: talent pipeline, commercialization, and bioliteracy, and really provided an opportunity for states to learn from one another as to what might be scaled to their state or what might be transferable. And you can see a couple of pictures here of the kind of deep discussions that we were in. And you can go to the websites listed below, biotechacrossamerica.org, or the NSCEB launched a new resource guide as a part of the event that I would recommend you checking out. But really, I think this in itself, in my mind, just highlights how state level ecosystems and state level efforts are driving national progress in themselves, and it's critical to have our efforts here in DC in that, but not lose sight of what's going on out across states and across regions in the US. So with that, I'm going to end and just say thank you. I'm happy to have you email any questions or that, and really looking forward to this discussion and also hearing from Kelly.
Great. Thank you, Garrett. Really informative presentation. I'm going to pivot to Kelly in a minute, but I wanted you to explain how engineering is helping the life sciences develop new patient treatments. I remember being at a talk that Marcia McNutt, the head of the National Academy of Sciences, gave a few years ago, where she talked about how the combination of engineering and biology was just revolutionary,
Yeah,
particularly, in many respects. But given Research America's focus, can you explain and why and
okay.
how it's helping to bring better treatments to patients?
Would love to. It's
What's the
a great
hope?
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's um, maybe useful to start by taking a step back at kind of the underlying technologies and things that are causing this, right? So, in the last decade or so, our both ability to read, write, and edit DNA, so DNA sequencing, DNA
Mhm.
synthesis, and DNA editing, things like CRISPR that people might have heard about. Our ability to do this has increased like hugely, while at the same time the costs and just like barriers and that to do it have gone down. And I think the really critical and exciting pieces of this are that biology is something, as a result of understanding the letters of DNA and how we might engineer them or add them or edit them, means that we can treat it like engineering. And I think perhaps there's like very clear examples or more um, uh, uh, clear, obvious examples of like mRNA vaccines or
Mhm.
cell and gene therapies, like CAR T therapies, that are really existent at our ability to do these things. But there's this additional level, and particularly, if you add our, you know, um, if you add AI and data into the mix of understanding biology better and better, we can really do more things and really think of it as like programming in some way. And So you might be familiar with like if
Garrett,
then.
yeah, I'm gonna stop you there just
Yeah,
because we have a lot of questions. People are on the chat, but that was you give us a great nugget.
sure.
Things that I might not have thought of as engineering are really, being derived from engineering principles.
Totally.
So that
Totally.
that really helps me a lot. Now I'm going to pivot to you, Kelly. For those unfamiliar with bio, can you just share a bit about bio? And also, what are your members' biggest challenges right now on the ground?
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. Um, Hello, everyone. For those who may not have met me, I'm Dr. Kelly Seagraves. I'm BIO's Vice President for National Security and International Affairs. BIO, or the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, is a trade association based here in Washington, D.C., and we represent around 1,000 member companies in the human health biotech space. You might know us. Previously, we covered the broad spectrum of biotechnology sectors, but we did choose to focus more deeply on the human health space last year. Our members really range from some of the biggest biopharmaceutical companies to many, many mid-size and much smaller biotechnology companies. We also have members who are academic institutions, and then more recently, we have been working to incorporate more investors and service providers into our membership. And really, the focus there is to make sure that we are representing the human biotech ecosystem quite holistically, and that our advocacy really represents all of those different perspectives. So that is a little bit about us and who we represent. I will also just say that we do advocacy in Washington, D.C., but as Garrett mentioned, it's very important to be thinking about the states. So we also do advocacy out in the states. And we partner with our Council of CSBA, our Council of State Biotechnology Associations on that. Many, many states in the US have their own biotechnology associations. And then we don't do a lot of international advocacy directly. We do a little bit, but we partner really closely with our ICBA, the International Council of Biotechnology Associations. Similarly, countries around the world have their
Mhm.
own biotechnology associations, and those partnerships are invaluable to us because biotechnology is not just an American technology; it's really a global
Mhm.
ecosystem.
Right, right.
Um, some of the issues that we are hearing right now from our members are really around uncertainty. Garrett touched on this as we had the transition in the administration. We've seen a number of different policy changes. From a human health perspective, biotechnology innovation takes a really long time, usually decades and a lot of money, millions to billions. So any policies that bring in uncertainty are big concerns for our members. Some of the major ones to just touch on are the most favored nation pricing, which we prefer to call international reference pricing policies, tariffs and other trade related policies. The uncertainty and the kind of back and forth there really hinders our members from making business decisions. Um, and then FDA regulatory changes. Anything that changes the regulatory process midstream really brings a lot of uncertainty to our members. And the final thing I'll touch on is competition with China. One of
Mhm.
my roles at Bio is leading on national security, and we're really trying to make sure that we are advocating for advancing American biotech in order to compete with China and make sure that we can keep American biotech leadership here at home.
Kelly, that last point you made, I have a question on
Sure.
that. So I know a member of your board recently testified about China's efforts to dominate global biotech and the biotech supply chain. So can you share more about this concern and most importantly, how we can address it?
Yeah. So we there's a whole lot to unpack there.
Sure, there is a lot there.
Yeah.
I agree.
So
Yeah, go ahead.
one of the things I'll maybe start with is that more and more over the last couple years, we have been seeing how China's multi-decades long concerted policy to try and really dominate the biotech ecosystem is leading to successes. And so they're really becoming a serious and very accelerated competitor in the biotech ecosystem. And from Bio's perspective, we want to make sure that we are addressing potential security risks. Some of those include making sure that American patients have access to healthcare products when and where they need them. And we've
Mhm.
seen China to be an unreliable partner in both health and in other tech sectors. Um, but we are really careful to make sure that we advocate that decoupling from China is not simple. It's not the answer. The biotech ecosystem is really globally integrated. So we're trying to figure out how to find solutions that will solve those problems and create resiliency while not kind of bottoming out our biotech ecosystem. And one of the key partners that we use there to try and find some of those ideas is the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology. I think their report really provides us with a good overview of the situation and a good roadmap for solutions. They've been a great partner with Bio, and we really look forward to continuing to work with them.
Great. Well, we already have some terrific questions. I'm going to ask one more before I turn to our audience questions. And that's the SBIR STTR program. Um, Kelly, I know Bio worked very hard, and Garrett, your organization may have as well, but to get that going again. Can you explain why it's so important to the biotech sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So just in case there's anyone who's not familiar with those acronyms, that's the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs. And we saw that Congress reauthorized those earlier this month. We're eagerly awaiting the president's finalization of that reauthorization for the next 5 years. Those programs provide funding for small businesses, um, basically to help get their innovations over what we tend to call the valley of death. It's really important non-dilutive federal grants. And it helps those startups reach kind of key proof of concept milestones, which then allows them to attract more private sector investment.
Mhm.
I mentioned earlier that biotech innovation can cost millions to billions of dollars. So there's a lot of money that's needed to get
Mhm.
from an idea to a final product that's in the hands of patients. And those small businesses, they are the key drivers of innovation. 76% of our medicines originate from small startup biotech companies. That's a lot.
Mhm.
And 12% of all FDA approved drugs. So these programs are really important for bio and for our ecosystem. And we're just really happy to see that program reauthorized.
So are we at Research America, and we appreciate all the work
Yeah.
that you did. So I'm going to turn to our audience questions, and I have a pair of questions that I'd love for you both to respond to. So Mark comments that the legislative pipeline that you spoke about, Garrett, invests heavily in manufacturing and in scaling biotech. And he's asking who's investing in the data infrastructure that keeps patients in the clinical trials that will validate those products. Because right now, the signals that predict dropout, caregiver burden, financial strain, adherence barriers, they're not captured by any system at scale. And then Lynn adds communication science and behavioral sciences issues around increasing public involvement upfront, science literacy, et cetera, is also critical. I'm not doing justice to Lynn's wonderful question, but she also notes that bridging to states is a good first step. But there's real work that needs to happen. Garrett, do you
Yeah,
want to go
I can
first?
start and particularly a great set of questions and kind of love the call out or the um that sense of seeing a lot of that physical infrastructure, the biomanufacturing kind of thing, but maybe not feeling the same love in the data side or the cyber. cyber infrastructure. And I think that's so important. And I mentioned the AI ready biodata bill that was just introduced, and I'm hoping that there might be some other legislation coming, but really, especially given the uh, prioritization of AI and what it may be able to do to accelerate all sectors, of which healthcare is obviously so important. Seeing that we really do need to focus and double down on things like data infrastructure and things like standards and that, and particularly have it kind of percolate through the entire ecosystem. So starting from, early stage research and continuing all the way through the bedside.
Terrific. And Jacqueline, if you want to unmute folks, because we do have a lot of people who want to ask questions. Now, the only thing is I can't see hands raised. So while you're doing that, I'm going to ask, let's see, Tim, uh, says that while China is a huge threat to biotech in the US, the bigger threat is the attack on the biomedical enterprise in our own country. And what are both organizations doing to stand up for academic biomedical research with this administration and Congress? And I know you're doing a lot.
Garrett, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sounds good. So, yeah, I mean, as mentioned, EBRC is a member organization, really, with a community of researchers. Right, we have researchers from over 100 universities and so on and so forth, and really, especially in the past year, have been really challenged of how we as an organization kind of continue to you know support our members in that when their funding is cut or their students are losing fellowships in that, and really have aimed to um, you know ensure that the importance and the voice of biotechnology and biomedical research in that continues to be seen here in DC, but really have been fairly disheartened, and I think you captured in your question as well, by the kind of current state of the biomedical research enterprise.
Edward writes he's a big fan of both EBRC and Bio, and he wanted to get your perspective on the Iran conflict and subsequent destabilization of the global oil supply chain. Could that translate into renewed interest in bio-based carbon feedback, energy, bio-based carbon feedstock energy production? So are we seeing grains becoming an energy asset, and is the U.S. positioned to capitalize on this challenge? That might be.
Garrett,
please, Kelly.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because we do human health products, it's probably not a question. Yeah.
I can take that, and then maybe can toss it over to Kelly for the kind of broader picture around supply chains and maybe any relevance. But yeah, I mean, I think fortunately or unfortunately, this the past month itself has showed us the fragility of so much of the supply chains and things that we've been talking about for so long, but maybe in more philosophical or that ways. So as I've said and will continue to say, really want to ensure that policymakers and people in government understand that biotechnology itself can be a solution to supply chain challenges, whether it's biomanufacturing or other things, and I think we really need to take a deep internal look over which things and which sectors in that we want to bring on shore and really ensure that any of this risk is mitigated. I think that you captured the energy piece really well, but as you know, and as Kelly knows, it definitely doesn't stop there. And so much fragility around pharmaceuticals, even food and agriculture, and that. So, it is much, much more of a holistic challenge than just energy. But the past month has really showed us the critical area in energy in particular.
So I'm going to
Maybe
pivot.
I'll
Oh, please,
Oh,
Kelly,
I was
go right
just gonna
ahead.
jump in to say we've
Yeah.
been getting that question um, from policymakers around DC, and for us, at least for our members, the strain on supply chains doesn't seem to have hit directly yet. Now, there are other types of human health companies that, especially in more of the generic space, that I think are starting to see strain. And I think that's a kind of important distinction we have to keep in mind is that not all, even human health biotech products are created equal or have the same supply chain. So no one specific policy solution is gonna fix that. But I think this is a really good call out for scientific programs like the Genesis mission, where the NSCEB has a recommendation for a grand challenge around making biotechnology predictably engineerable and solving these kind of problems at speed and at scale would be really fantastic to help the United States be able to pivot in these types of events, whether it's from a war or major weather events or something else. So I just wanted to call out again the power of projects like the Genesis mission. And we're really hoping at Bio that the Genesis mission will continue to form partnerships with other departments and agencies around the US government, such as NIH, that have that more human health focus, so
Mhm.
that we can see some projects really focused in that particular space.
So, for folks who aren't familiar with the Genesis project, it's being run out of the Department of Energy, but it does have a human health component. So, it's great that you're engaged in that, Kelly. And if folks want to learn more about how they can be involved, because that is a a domestic piece of policy that does seem to be going somewhere right now, right? That has global implications. Um, but do you think that the the research community, the biomedical research community needs to do more to ensure that Genesis, the principles of Genesis and the resources that are being put into Genesis, because a lot of it's around supercomputing and AI, will have some gains for medical research. Do we need to be focusing on Genesis a little bit more, I guess is what I'm asking, in the medical community?
So, so my personal recommendation is yes. I think that AI and the Genesis mission is going to be one of this Trump administration's big flagship S&T programs. I don't expect we're going to see another big flagship. So, figuring out how to engage with Genesis mission, I think, is critically important. And really trying to understand where the national labs, where their capabilities are. They're incredible. They're such a great national
Mhm.
resource.
Right.
For us, though, at Bio, we're trying to figure out how can our companies plug in. Does it make sense for
Mhm.
them to plug in? When does it make sense? They're a
Mhm.
little bit further along the innovation kind of timeline than some of the academic institutions that are members of EBRC. And so for us, we're trying to really bridge the gap on understanding bidirectionally, and figure out how we
Mhm.
can make connections so that our members can figure out whether it makes sense to partner, and then if they want to, ensure that they can do that.
Thanks, Kelly.
And
Someone asked if we want to, who can we contact to learn more about the
yeah,
Genesis human health
I
component?
I could take that one. So, about maybe 2 weeks ago now, the Genesis mission announced the opening of this kind of like partnership exchange that I just put in the chat. And so it's really right now kind of at the stage of interested parties, which I hope are many of you or your organizations can create profiles talking about your activities, your interest, what how you feel you might fit into this, and then will be kind of opportunity for partnership formation, connections, that kind of thing. So this website, genesismissionconsortium.org, is maybe a good place to start if you want to see how you or your organization might fit into the Genesis mission. And then to just quickly add on to Kelly's thing, I think one of the things that I always come back to on this exact topic is you know the biomedical enterprise and biomedical research is where so many of the success stories that we have are right now, and particularly at the intersection of how AI can accelerate biology, and that is in the healthcare space. So I think we all and you all have such a great kind of starting point that you're coming from of things that you can point to and things that you could highlight. Hey, AI and data have really made this transformational. We need to double down.
Mhm. Can folks who are on today's Alliance call, can they contact either of you for more information about how to plug in on Genesis?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Okay.
awesome.
Um, Maybe you can just say your email out loud and we'll put them in the chat. Actually, Jacqueline has them. She can put them in the chat. So that's great. I want to pivot to the FDA. So I know that that's an area where bio is very active. We've got PDUFA 8, I think it is, coming up next year. Um, in terms of clinical trials, what kinds of regulatory changes can we make at the FDA, to ensure that it's still doing its job in assessing the safety and efficacy of new medicines, but perhaps lower the cost, lower the timeline using new technologies. AI obviously stands out as one. Kelly, what's bio doing in that space?
Sure. And I'm going to preface this way answer with saying we have a whole separate science and regulatory team that is
Uh-huh.
entirely focused on the FDA. So my answer is probably going to be a little unsatisfactory just because I'm not going to be able to do it justice.
True.
But I will
Hmm.
say that one of the things that our team has done is put together a white paper that's called Strategies for Enhancing FDA as the Global Gold Standard. And I can, after I finish speaking now, I
Uh-huh.
can get the link and put it in the chat for anyone who wants to look at it. But
Uh-huh.
within that white paper, it highlights three primary recommendation areas. The first of which is really around reducing the time and cost and complexity of early drug development. And that includes some of those streamlining of clinical trials, for example. The second is around strengthening the regulatory review, basically making it more predictable and efficient, which really ensures that the US system for clinical development remains globally competitive.
Uh-huh.
And then the third is supporting new models for external engagement and transparency. And really, it as a whole, BioC's modernization of the FDA is absolutely critical to American biotechnology, human health biotechnology competitiveness. And this kind of comes back to some of the conversation we were having earlier on competitiveness with China, for example, where we're seeing a lot of advancement in their clinical trial space. So really making sure that we are modernizing our FDA, keeping up to speed, and able to get products across that finish line in the hands of patients quickly is really
Terrific.
important.
Well, before we close, I want to pivot to the Biotech Caucus. What were some of the messages that got both Republicans and Democrats to be willing to start this caucus and get involved in this caucus? Is biosecurity an important, pandemics, et cetera? Is that important? What are some of the uh, you know, key motivating factors to get this off the ground? And then
Yeah.
lastly, let us know if folks want to get their members of Congress to join the caucus, can they contact one of you?
Yeah, yes. Would love for you to encourage your members to join, and am more than happy to talk about the process for that, as well
Okay.
as I'm always incredibly open for ideas of briefings and things, really to this point of building awareness and engagement on the topic.
Great.
On the broader picture, I do think that this awareness or building of the awareness that um, biotechnology can be a real solution to our national security, and particularly not always in the way that people first think, right? So, pandemic preparedness and that being, an obvious way that we could ensure our national security through our health. But there's other offices and other regions that focusing on agriculture implications have been the ones that resonate. There's been some offices in states, and I am very interested in the topic of how biotechnology can be used for critical minerals extraction, which you'll get me
Hmm.
off on a whole other tangent. But you could imagine how a senator in Arizona or a senator in Colorado might see, oh, biotechnology can be utilized in this, critical opportunity, critical economic sector of our state. So I think it's been a mix about this underlying, importance of national security as kind of the umbrella, but then also tailoring the relevance and the applications of biotechnology to the needs and challenges of the state, of the district.
Great. Kelly, anything you want to add to that?
I just wanted to double down on what Garrett just said.
Hmm.
So prior to joining Bio, I was at the State Department, and I really regularly had these kind of odd conversations, especially with folks out at embassies. They're fantastic, but we would be talking about what is biotechnology and whether or not the country that they were posted in was interested in it. And I'd often get this answer of, no, I don't really think that my country does that. And I'd say, huh, that's odd. Do you have the CDC or do you have agriculture interests? And they would say, of course, we've got those. So I just wanted to say what Garrett just said about the power of biotechnology is really a tool, and trying to encourage that bioliteracy around thinking of it as a tool, I think is really important for advancing biotech innovation and the policies that we want to see happen. The more and more we can help policymakers understand that biotechnology is so similar to advanced computing and that there's a biotech stack, that the semiconductors and the coding, everything Garrett was saying earlier about the engineering qualities of modern biotechnology. I think that'll
Hmm.
really help us to advance those policies, and then helping to translate that into the types of products or services Garrett outlined: mining, agriculture. We've got the human component that bio
Hmm.
represents. There's so many different stakeholders that can benefit from the power of biotechnology. And I think really helping to see policymakers see those advantages, those cross demographic advantages, helps them get on board and want to join something like the Biotech Caucus, because once they understand, it's really a no-brainer to want to get involved.
Well, Kelly and Garrett, if we had members of Congress on today, I'm sure they would want to join just based on your presentation and conversation. You've been terrific. And before we lose our audience, if you enjoyed today's conversation, we would love for you to converse with us daily or as much as you'd like, by joining us on our two main social channels, LinkedIn and Instagram. And I think Jacqueline's going to put up what they are. So please follow us on social media, join in our in our frequent posts. And then also our next Alliance meeting is actually no, it's next Thursday, April 9th at 12 p.m. with Siobhan Murray. And she's from Senator Tim Kaine's office. He has legislation focusing on the crisis in chronic pain, treating the 25% of adults in the US have chronic pain. And so Siobhan is going to talk about the senator's work in coming up with better and safer solutions for those folks whose lives are so impacted. So, again, Garrett, Kelly, our audience, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.